everyone! Today I'll be showing you my process for how I turned this composition sketch into a finished art piece for my current project. I'll try and break down the process as best I can and explain what my thought process is at different points. So first thing I do is I choose what I want my subject and focus to be, which is a couple of character designs for my personal project. I thought it would be good to sort of see how they work within more of an environment piece. And then next I sketch out a couple of composition ideas. I like to keep my sketches very simplified for this part, mostly focusing on bigger shapes, as I find that if I try to build a composition using small lines and details straight away, I usually lose a sense of what the overall structure and focus will be. I select this thumbnail as I like the curves and how the tree sort of frames the characters. Even though the sketch is simple, I can see the creative potential in the shape language, so this is the one that I decided to go for. The setting is going to be a fantasy garden with a fairy tale book vibe to it, so I feel that the environment details really need to reflect this. So I plan out what I can, because sometimes when I start a piece which I want to have a lot of plants and details, but I haven't exactly planned the specific designs, I end up drawing a bit aimlessly and drawing with no idea of the structure or the shape, and this can work for some instances, but I feel it doesn't really work for me and it can end up making me a bit more stressed because I don't really know how the overall design's going to look. So I draw how the trees could look, the plants, the rocks, how I design the moss on the rocks, all of this stuff really helps me to compose the piece with more thoughtfulness in the internal design. I thought adding some interaction between my character and some mermaids would be a fun way to add more storytelling to the scene. And once I have all my visual information planned, I make another rough sketch to show how everything's going to be positioned, as well as a rough idea for how the lighting will sort of look. When I'm happy with how everything is placed, I start to go over with more detailed and less sketchy line work. Mostly for the characters, I feel like I'd like to have more of a refined line work for the characters, and then for the environments I sort of still keep it a little bit sketchy, because this is something that I'll probably go back and change and edit it a little bit more. So I like how this is looking now at the line work stage. I feel like everything about the composition's working quite nice, so when I feel more confident about this, I decide to start on some colours. I begin filling in my character, starting with just a base colour to make sure everything is filled in, and then after that I'll go over with the colours of my selected colour palette then. So sometimes people fill in the backgrounds first before the characters. I just did the characters first because I already knew what their colour palettes were going to be, so I did them first so that then I knew how to make the environment look so that it would match nicely with their colour palette. I don't do the colours for the mermaids just yet because I know that I kind of want their colour palette to match with the environment, so I thought it might be good to do some blocking in of like the grass and the trees, using bigger shapes to begin with for the leaves, which I'll add more detail to later. So I just use the lasso tool to just sort of draw around some big shapes, just fill it all in. Nothing too detailed as I know that I'll add the detail later on. This is just to still make sure that the overall composition is working for the piece. It still has that sense of curve and flow that I'm really wanting for it. So now that I'm happy with this, my next step is to start thinking a bit more about the background. Since the plants in the front are going to be quite complex and detailed, the background I feel needs to be quite simplified, since if it's got too many things going on in it, it could draw attention away from the characters, especially since it's the thing that's sort of framing my main characters right now. So I decide on painting the silhouettes of trees and adding some light line work to them. This works to add to the background without overwhelming the rest of the drawing. Having the background set up, showing what the tone and colours will roughly be, means that I can edit the other elements to better complement and contrast it, such as by making the trees slightly darker to draw more focus. I kind of want the trees to look a little bit like clouds. I want them to have a bit more of a dreamy look to them, so I just sort of take a different tone of the green, go over it with like a brush, just adding a little bit more depth to it. And then for the branches, I start adding some line work, which I was always intending to do because I wanted the artwork to feel more like a fairy tale book illustration. Usually for environments, I focus on the bigger elements first, whatever's going to take up the most space within the overall composition. Then I move on to what the smaller details will be. So for here, say I did the rock and the wooden stump fences that I have sort of framing my character a bit more along with the trees. Then once I know how they're looking and how their colour palette's going to be, I thought that I would then start adding some of the moss over them using the style that I planned on my thumbnail sheet from earlier. I draw it in a way so that it flows up and down the rocks, so it brings more fluidity to the overall scene. It's always good to try and have that composition always in mind when creating these sort of artworks. At this stage, I'm happy with how the environment is looking around my main characters, so I start blocking in the colours for my mermaids. I position them so that they flow with the curve of the hill, and when I have them blocked in, I go ahead and start on some of the plants for around the body of water. I add more colours to the mermaids, intentionally using ones which blend with the environment, since I want that feeling that they are a part of this world and more connected to it. When I'm at this stage, I also allow myself more freedom just to have fun with everything, because I'm pretty satisfied with how the composition's looking, so I feel like I can sort of be a bit more loose with it without losing that composition now. I add line work to the lily pads and plants around the side to develop the illustrative storybook vibe that I wanted for this artwork. I give the water more ripples around the mermaids, as well as building up the details on my main characters. At this stage, I feel I'm finished with the actual drawing. If I add any more, I worry that it would be too much. So just to finish off, I play around with the lighting to see what works well. I end up with this warm golden hue, which I love, and I feel it keeps the focus on my main characters really well. The mermaids feel a bit more hidden, which is what I intended for them, but I still have them a tiny little hint of sparkle around them. There's a really fun sense of flow to this piece, which I feel I achieved because of the composition thumbnails I made, which helped me to exaggerate the shapes and find an overall look which I felt would work really well. One thing I always do is see how my illustration looks in black and white. This is good for showing the tonal values and which part of the artwork stands out more. I really like how the light background contrasts with my character along with the trees framing them, but I think I would, if I could do this again, potentially make the area surrounding the mermaids and leaves just a bit darker to add some more contrast to it. Quite a few artists do work in grayscale to begin with and add colours later on. I kind of always prefer to use colours first, but I make sure to keep a constant track of how the tonal values are looking at each stage, and it is still a learning process for me. I would like to maybe try and paint just using grayscale first. Maybe that's something I'm going to try and work on a bit more for the future. I feel that this is definitely one of my most ambitious artworks to date, definitely one of my most detailed. For me, every artwork is a valuable learning curve. When I don't get the results I want, I know to try a different strategy next time, and when something does work, I make sure to continue developing it and implementing that technique. Anyway, thank you so much, and I'm excited to do some more videos for you in the future.